the United Nations Office of this office is officially called the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, in partnership with the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, which was represented here by Under Secretary General Saad Bramats, who is also the Chief Prosecutor of the Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, and who also previously prosecuted in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and the Aegis Trust, represented by Freddy Mutanguha, and of course here in this venue of the Kigali Genocide Memorial. We've about to conclude a series of high-level events here in Kigali, Rwanda, that are focused on strengthening global efforts to prevent genocide and related crimes from the perspective of critical angles instrumental to prevention. And so this week-long initiative has taken place from 4th to the 9th of November 2024 and has included 3 workshops. And the first workshop was for women community leaders with a focus on women from Sudan. And then we had an expert consultation on mediation for prevention, mediation where risk factors for genocide exist. And finally, what we're having right now in this room is this International Conference on Ethnicity and Prevention of Genocide. And all of these 3 are aimed at advancing practical solutions to some of the most complex challenges in the field of genocide prevention, with a view on immediate implementation. So these events represent a major milestone in our ongoing work to honor the memory of past genocides and build a more peaceful future. And by bringing together experts, survivors, and advocates from around the world, we have taken critical steps towards further developing the tools and strategies needed to prevent genocide and towards identifying practical solutions to make prevention a reality from the different perspectives addressed during each event. So specifically, the first workshop on women, it was the workshop on the implementation of what we call the Napoli Plan of Action, a plan of action we put together in Napoli, in Italy, that works to counter and address hate speech and prevent incitement to violence that could lead to genocide led by women. That first workshop that was held on 4th and 5th November convened women leaders from around the world to build awareness and understanding of this landmark policy document as a first step towards identifying implementation initiatives. And participants, including prominent Sudanese women leaders, discussed practical ways to enhance the role of women in communities, in countering hate speech and preventing incitement to violence. And at the conclusion of the workshop, the Sudanese women issued a powerful declaration calling for an immediate end to violence in their country and demanding their full inclusion in peace processes. Their statement underscored the critical importance of women's equal and effective participation across all aspects of peace negotiations and prevention initiatives, even in the circumstances when risk factors for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity exist. So then the second expert consultation that was on promoting dialogue and mediation to prevent genocide and related crimes was held on 6th and 7th November. It built upon virtual meeting consultations previously held on this topic and led to the identification of key recommendations, challenges, and opportunities related to the use of mediation in situations at risk of genocide and related crimes, by which I mean war crimes and crimes against humanity. The consultation resulted in the finalization of a comprehensive policy guidance document on leveraging dialogue and mediation to advance genocide prevention. And then on 8th and 9th November, the Ethnicity and Genocide Policy Guidance for Prevention Conference, which we are in right now, is happening. And we are taking into account the significance of ethnicity as defining one of the protected groups in the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. And so this global gathering of academics, civil society representatives, and government officials has been exploring the complex relationship between ethnicity and genocide with the goal of developing practical frameworks and policy recommendations to prevent ethnic-based incitement to violence and promote peaceful coexistence as a building block of continued and sustainable prevention. So I am underscoring the important steps taken during these three events to advance global efforts for genocide prevention worldwide. I do know that women community leaders, mediators, and experts in the field of ethnicity will remain at the forefront of initiatives to prevent genocide and related crimes. And at this week's events, we have together identified practical steps forward to enhance our ability to prevent genocide by strengthening our fight against incitement, refining our tools to mediate in contexts where the risk of commission of genocide and related crimes is all too real, and sharpening our policy toolkit to prevent ethnic-based violence. So I'm also underlining the significance of the fact of these initiatives being held here at the Genocide Memorial in Kigali, in Rwanda, where the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi took place. I'm fully aware of the power of the place, the power of this place that we are in right now, the inspiration that has informed the discussions and deliberations by participants at these events has come from the understanding that what happened here in Rwanda must be prevented from happening again anywhere, and at all times. And we do say so knowing that there have been instances of genocidal violence happening in many places around the world, but that doesn't stop our resolve from saying never again. So we're grateful to Rwanda's Minister for National Unity and Civic Engagement, Jean Damascene Bizimana, who officially opened the ethnicity conference, and he decried the use of genocide negation and denial as threats to truth and reconciliation. And so I have also had a meeting while I've been here with Rwanda's Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Ambassador Olivier J.P. Duhugirehe, and to discuss ways of strengthening the long-standing partnership between Rwanda and my mandate in the areas of peace building and genocide prevention. So Rwanda holds a significance, a very special significance for my mandate as the site of the horrific genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. And it is a solemn duty to learn from this tragic history and ensure that never again becomes a reality, not just a slogan. So I'm emphasizing that the fight against genocide and related crimes remains an ongoing global challenge. We must continue to raise awareness, including on genocide denial. We must foster dialogue. We must develop innovative prevention strategies to protect all populations from the scourge of genocide. And we must pursue accountability. Only then can we truly fulfill our collective responsibility to uphold human dignity and build a more just, peaceful world where crimes such as the ones committed in Rwanda in 1994 against the Tutsi, in which Hutu and other people also died, cannot happen anymore.
I have to say that this is really a great opportunity for the world. The 6 days that we spent together on these very important 3 workshops. The first one was the role of women in the prevention of genocide. We have seen that, and this is really some of the comments that I heard from so many people here, including my friend Gregory Stanton, who worked a lot on the genocide, the process of genocide, talking about how in his lifetime he has seen that men are the planners of genocide. So having women involved in the prevention of genocide, the ideology of genocide, denial of genocide, it's crucial. And that's what we've been discussing here. The second discussion was centered around the role of media and role of mediation and dialogue in the prevention of genocide, and especially looking at situation of at the risk of genocide. So that was really very transformative journey. And today we are closing, which started yesterday, another session related to ethnicity and genocide. which is very, very important because the identity-based violence, it have been seen, and that's exactly what happened in this country where the Tutsi were targeted. And we feel that having a policy guidance that will help the practitioners, the state members of the UN, and many people who are interested to implement the prevention of genocide and the related crimes, this would be very, very important. It's so significant for the Kigali Genocide Memorial, very significant for Rwanda, but at the same time for survivors, to see there is an effort that's being put together to prevent genocide around the world. And these workshops that we've been taking place here at the Kigali Genocide Memorial, it built up on the previous discussions and the workshop that happened and it took place in July this year, that was focusing on the discussion on how to build up a policy guidelines on the looking how to prevent the hate speech, and you can and that's really can lead to the genocide. So thank you once again, Madam Alice Nderitu, for considering having the discussions in this country, and also I may also say that the policy guidelines that was developed after the July workshop was named after Nyamata Action Plan, which also means a lot for the Nyamata Genocide Memorial as well.
I'm here because the judicial system, I was a law professor, was not working. It took 6 years for the average civil case to get through. And so I was a law professor, so they brought me in. And what I came to was a divided society. It was immediately apparent. Even on the ID cards, it identified people who were Tutsi or Hutu or Twa or naturalized. I had dinner one night with the president of the Constitutional Court, Joseph Kabaruganda. He was a moderate Hutu. And I said, Mr. Kabaruganda, can't you, in your Constitutional Court role, outlaw this classification on the ID cards? And he said, no, we can't because we don't have judicial review. And he said, you have to go to see the president. So I made an appointment to see President Habyarimana. This is 1989. I went in to talk to him to report on what I'd found about the judicial system. And among other things, I recommended that they rediscover and reapply the Gacaca court system, which was traditional in Rwanda and worked better than the Belgian courts. But what I also said to him was, these classifications on the ID cards have to be abolished because they will be used for genocide. When I said that to him, it was though a mask went down. He didn't want to hear this. We talked more about it, and before I left, I said, Mr. President, unless you take very strong steps to prevent a genocide here, you are going to have a genocide here in Rwanda within 5 years. That was 1989. I joined the State Department in 1992 and was sent out here with the UN Commission of Inquiry. We recommended establishment of in 1994, we recommended the establishment of the ICTR. And then I was asked to write the UN resolutions to create the ICTR. The ICTR was so important because it made it impossible to deny that this genocide had happened. And even today, there are deniers that this genocide was a genocide against the Tutsi. Let me affirm, it was a genocide against the Tutsi, mostly the Tutsi. Of course, there were a few moderate Hutus were also killed, including Joseph Kabaruganda and Agatha, the prime minister. But it was largely a genocide against the Tutsi, and that's why that's the name of that genocide now. Well, yesterday, I went to see this marvelous museum that the Aegis Trust has built here. And it is on a mass grave, as you know. Over 200,000 bodies of people who were killed in that genocide are right here. When I went through this museum that Freddie presides over and so ably provides over, a museum that, in fact, my friends James and Stephen Smith helped to build, to have the idea to build. I wept. It still brings tears to me, what happened here. And it has to bring tears to everyone who thinks about the future of the human race. There is only one race, the human race. And we must constantly reaffirm that and rediscover it. Even in the United States, a country that was founded on white supremacy with slavery, that has committed genocides against our own Native Americans, against our African Americans. Even there, we have not yet come to terms with our history. We are still in denial in the United States. This is a country that has faced its past, that is not allowing the past to determine its future. I praise this country. You in Rwanda are an example to the whole world. Rwanda, like Germany, has actually faced its past and is now a leader in this whole effort to overcome ethnicity, to overcome nationality, to reaffirm that for all of us, we are part of the same race, the human race. So I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm also so happy to be here with Alice Nderitu. Genocide Watch, which I founded after I realized that governments weren't the answer to, wasn't the whole answer to ending genocide. I'm so happy that finally the Office of the Special Advisor at the UN is now held by a woman. Because as Freddie was just saying, I am convinced that genocide and war are male problems. They're caused by men. There has not been a single genocide in world history, and I have studied this. I was a professor of genocide studies. There wasn't a single genocide in world history that was planned by women. Think about that. That is a huge fact. When women are half the human race. There also haven't been any wars planned by women. And that is why I do not believe we will overcome war and genocide until women become the leaders of many more of the world's countries. So it is such a pleasure for me to be here in this marvelous country, which I love. I love Rwanda. And to be here where you are such a witness to the whole world of how the forces of genocide and war can be overcome.
Kindly introduce yourself, the media that you work for, and the question that you have, and who you're addressing your question to, and try to be brief as much as you can. You can show by hands those who are ready to ask questions. Can I see 3 hands first, if you're there?
You've seen Rwanda, you know what, from before, what happened after. The whole problem of just not giving the right attention on what happened really in Rwanda and keeping on tweaking it like if it was, in fact, of showing Rwanda like like it is actually not. And the coverage of that, and the repetition of Rwanda is a state led with an iron fist, and in fact really diminishing what really genocide was and what it implied, and at that time, of course, everybody had even concluded that Rwanda as a nation was clinical dead. And you've seen the difference. And the whole counter narrative that has been, and that is still on today. And when you talk about justice, how the whole, even justice after the genocide, has been essentially politicized to the point that until today, outside Rwanda, justice was never rendered. Even with the ICTR, it is ICTR truly has failed Rwanda, has failed the Banyarwanda. And it is actually because Rwanda at least had their own system to deal with it, that it has now given what we see today. And then also because the Nderitu is doing a great job at the UN, and she's reporting everywhere from everywhere, and is always there. But Lee also at the UN, which is in fact at the end of the day a political institution, international political, but where it's still the big guys who lead, in fact, all the trends, and they politicize everything. So as much as we see her reports, as much as what we are saying today, even, I mean, yesterday in Goma, a young man was killed, publicly, grilled, and they were cutting his body, and at this stage, it's not that they were just even they were even selling. That means just to have also the people, in fact, accepting this act by buying, you know, that showing that they are part of it. So whatever we do and all of that, how do you cope with that?
My name is Nderitu and I work for IGIHE.com. I want to ask Nderitu about this meeting. Spent like 3 days here. What the main recommendation took from this dialogue, and how can mediation and dialogue be effectively utilized or used to prevent and address genocide in the society. I want also to ask Straton, he mentioned about example for Rwanda. How do you think Rwanda now can be example to the world to prevent genocide, ideology or genocide happen again? Thank you.
Advisor of Secretary General of the UN, Alice. I want to ask, you have formulated or you have taken these resolutions and recommendations. As a journalist, I want to ask how these resolutions will access to countries that have hate speeches or ethnicity or divisions. How will you apply these resolutions and where will you go? And who will carry them to those countries or to those societies? Thank you.
The UN was founded by colonial powers at the end of the Second World War. It is still in the grip of the colonial powers. They demanded to have a veto in the Security Council. And so the Security Council has largely failed to stop genocides because there's been so many vetoes. The UN Charter needs to be revised. It needs to be rewritten. in Article 109 of the UN Charter are the procedures by which that can be done. It's right in the Charter. All it takes is 7 members of the Security Council and a majority of the General Assembly to call a conference to rewrite the UN Charter. And we need it now, because we now see in Sudan, for example, the failure of the UN Security Council to end what is very clearly a genocide, and has failed in many other genocides as well. I was in the State Department during the Rwandan genocide. Our lawyers in the State Department refused to call it genocide for 3 months at the height of the genocide. I fought them. They said, in fact, Joan Donahue, who was the leader of the lawyers, said, well, we don't know if there's enough intent. This is when they were killing 10,000 people a day. I said, Joan, what do you need to prove intent? She was promoted. She became president of the International Court of Justice, in fact. For my troublemaking, I was terminated in the State Department. So it is a failure in our institutions that we still need to address. We still don't have an international force that can intervene in time. Articles 43 through 47 of the UN Charter, in fact, provided for creation of such a force. But the PERM 5 members have never let it be created. That is why I think the best that we can do now is regional enforcement of international law. That is why I have actually written a resolution, and we've sent it to all the members of the UN Security Council to create an intervention force in Sudan with 10,000 troops. But no one in the Security Council is willing to introduce it. The UK is now the president. The US will be the president in December. I don't think it'll be introduced then either. So I am calling on the president of Rwanda to take the lead in asking the African Union to put together a force to intervene in that genocide. And that is legal under Article 8 of the UN Charter. They don't have to wait for the UN Security Council. We're also addressing hate speech. As you know, genocides don't start just by having people arm themselves. They start with hate speech. And so Genocide Watch and the Special Advisor's Office now has a memorandum of understanding to form a company, if you will, with the AI and social media companies to develop the software necessary to recognize and actually answer hate speech. Not wait for it, not take it down, answer it instantly. Only AI is fast enough. And so we're going to do that. We need the institutions. Only through institutions, really, can we do the kind of preventive work that we really need to do. And fortunately, we have Alice and her marvelous Office for the Prevention of Genocide, who's thinking into the future. Thank you.
And I was clinically dead after the genocide because nothing was functioning. And I think it's really one of the wonders of this century that when you talk about Rwanda in this continent, we are talking about a first among equals, from being clinically dead to being a first among equals, a very strong country, a country that has developed very strong leadership. We see Rwandans in very crucial positions in many places around the world. And you know, when I hear some of the things that are said that to downplay, for example, the country of Rwanda, I think to myself, this is the power of genocide, that it has such power, intergenerational power, And it has power because if you need to kill 1 million people, then you really do need a lot of people to kill 1 million people. And by the time the 1 million people are getting killed, it means we've completely failed in prevention. And as we often say, that the UN failed in this country. The UN failed in Srebrenica as well. And the Secretary General then, Kofi Annan, when he took over, he apologized. And based on the advice of Professor Stanton right here, he created this office that I'm holding. So we cannot stop the naysayers, but it's important to understand the reality of where all these naysayers come from, because some of them are actually informed by genocide deniers. Because if we fail in prevention, then what happens is that then we have to rely on accountability. We have to rely on court processes. And for court processes, we have to ask ourselves, how many people can a court try? Genocide is often described as a crime of crimes, and it's a crime of intent. You have to prove intent, that there was intent to destroy in whole or in part an ethnic, racial, religious, or national group as such. And so very, very difficult. And I think so important to look at the perspective of, I know the ICTR, I've seen all the critiques of the ICTR. The expectations were so huge, and yet it could not handle all those expectations. And but the ICTR gave us something, give something to the world that the world did not have. Because, you know, this Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, it came into place in 1948, on December 9th, as the first human rights convention that the UN ever adopted. And then we had a whole period between 1948 and the Akayesu case here, where nobody was convicted for genocide by an international criminal tribunal. And so what Rwanda, what the ICTR did was give us the first case convicted, the first conviction for genocide in the world. And it's so important because it's a criminal tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Extremely important institutions because everything is international about them. The judges are international, the prosecutors are international. You cannot accuse that court of bias. So for a case to be pronounced that this Akayesu case, that this was a conviction for the crime of genocide, it made a huge, huge impact in terms of jurisprudence, but also in terms of policies, in terms of precedents, in terms of so many things. So, you know, we rely so much, and I wish my colleague Sad Bramat was here because often we speak with him, and we speak with him about the number of people who are indicted by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, who are still free, who are still living free lives. Many of them, actually all of them, in countries that are member states of the UN. I've issued a number of statements calling them out, saying you are member states of the UN, you are hosting these people. These people are accused of this crime, the crime of genocide. They are accused of murder. You shouldn't be protecting them. You should find a way to either try them or bring them home. And that also explains why, like, each time anybody is convicted for genocide anywhere in the world, we issue a statement. We want the world to know that whoever is in your country and is a genocidaire or is been indicted for this crime, you need to hold them to account. So it's important that I do not think that the kind of things that are said, you know, about the country will stop. You know, in Kiswahili we say that if you see young children throwing stones at a tree, then you should know that that tree has fruits. There is something good about that particular place, and there are always all these naysayers. So if you imagine how many people were convicted for this crime, how many people are genuinely remorseful, and how many people out there are tarnishing Rwanda's names, and so many of them being genocide deniers, and we know them because they even hold conferences, they write papers, they peer review each other, so we know them. So consistently trying to bring down like what Rwanda is doing, but we are there to provide another voice. So like Professor Stanton and I can speak with an unbiased voice and say this is what we are seeing from out there. And we are extremely grateful to Rwanda for not only having come through this genocide, being willing to share the experience of having come through this genocide. So the question you asked about the young man in Goma, I'm going to follow that up. I've been consistent also, of course, highlighting the issues that are happening in the Kibbutz. Yeah, so I'm going to follow that up. And then there was the question on the recommendations, the key recommendations that came from the 3 meetings. So the first meeting that we had with the Sudanese women, informed by the fact of what's happening in Sudan, and have said this consistently in many statements, including in briefs to the Security Council and to the Human Rights Council, that we have a document that has, we call the framework of analysis, that has risk factors for the crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And in Sudan, as we speak right now, every single risk factor for the crime of genocide exists. I do not have the mandate to determine whether a genocide has happened or not. I cannot say so. I cannot also say whether a genocide is occurring right now. But what I can say is that there are risk factors, because only a court of law can determine whether a genocide has happened or not. And I know often that the word genocide is invoked in so many places. People say what's happening to us is a genocide. Only a court of law, and which is why the International Criminal Tribunal is so, for Rwanda, and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia are so important, because the verdicts that came out of those courts are what we can hold up to the world and say, this is a genocide. This is a proven genocide. So for the women who are here, we brought together not just Sudanese women, we also brought other women who are experts in peace building and mediation. And they worked with the Sudanese women. We discussed the situation in Sudan, and the Sudanese women themselves came up with this declaration to say, this is what we are seeing. So it's unique because nobody has had a discussion with the Sudanese from the perspective of the risk factors for genocide that exist in their country right now. So that was very unique. Then for mediation and dialogue, again, that was a space where we had discussion. We had global experts sitting in this room. Some of them are still here for this second meeting. And again, we were doing something very unique. We were asking ourselves, when there is a conflict, when mediators are working on a conflict, do they take into account when conflicts could be different, that this particular conflict could not, like for example, if you're mediating a conflict that resulted from electoral violence, and you are mediating a conflict that has risk factors for genocide or war crimes and crimes against humanity, should your methods be the same? And we concluded that they should not. So what came out of this room were very clear guidelines in terms of how you can mediate in a situation when there are clear risk factors for the crime of genocide. And often, it's assumed that if a genocide is about to happen, people step back and they think this is too big, this we can't handle. But now we want to equip mediators with the knowledge that you can actually mediate a genocide before it happens. You can actually prevent it before it happens. And then, of course, the last one, which is where we are in right now, this ethnicity and genocide conference. We are again looking at the risk factors for this crime of genocide, but also looking specifically at ethnicity, and looking at ethnicity from the perspective of what we call the protected groups, because the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide has lists for protected groups in its definition of genocide being the intent to destroy in whole or in part an ethnic or racial, religious or national group. So we are focusing on the ethnic alone the office, my predecessor, did a lot of work with religious groups, so we are focusing on the ethnic. So as we speak right now, we already have 72 policy recommendations, and we have the experts discussing those 72 policy recommendations, fine-tuning them, so that at the end of the day, we will have a document coming from this room that will really speak to the fact of what does a country that wants to prevent a genocide that is based on ethnicity need to do. What does that country need to have in place? So there are specific recommendations to the international organizations, recommendations to the media, recommendations to museums, recommendations to education facilities, to schools, to universities, recommendations to trade unions. I mean, there are recommendations, because there are 72, because we've tried to get recommendations to so many segments of society, so that it's a whole of society approach, different constituencies speaking to how do we prevent genocide together, how do we prevent ethnic related genocide together. And then the final question was on whatever we are formulating. You've called them resolutions. They're not resolutions, they are policies. And how will they inform other policies? How will they inform, how will they go to other countries? So the way it works is we write a policy, like Freddie has spoken about. We were here in July, and we put together a plan of action for countering and addressing hate speech and preventing incitement to violence that could lead to genocide for media stakeholders. And we were, of course, very specific to Rwanda because of the role that the media played in the genocide, both negatively and positively. So positively, we saw, for example, the Italian nun in Nyamata, who went on radio to say in 1992 that she could see that there were attacks that were happening, and these attacks were deliberate and systematic, and they were focused on the Tutsi. And then she got killed, but she used the radio positively because her message got out. Then, of course, we know the role that was played by Radio Mill Collins. We know the role that was played by Kangura newspaper. We know all these things that the media did here. So it was extremely important for us to have that document. And we named it Nyamata for what happened in Nyamata, including the role of the radio in calling attention to what was happening in Nyamata. So then, when we go back to New York with this document, what then happens is that we launch it, and then we have UN offices globally, so it's circulated globally in much the same way as the statements that we issue. So, like, for example, the statement I issued this week on the Dr. Ramucho, it's circulated across the world, across the globe. It's translated into the UN languages, all of them. So it gets to everywhere in the world. We have like Google alerts on the statements, and we see how far they go, because they go very, very far. So, but we have a very clear system. We especially work with UN resident coordinators. For example, when we were here in Rwanda, we also sat with the team, the UN country team here, to put together a plan of action for countering hate speech, so that then they take it into their programs and then begin working with it. But we also have a huge, huge network of constituencies. We have religious leaders. We have many, many policies, plans of actions with sports people. We have with the like traditional leaders. We have very many. So the fact that I have a global mandate therefore means that whatever we do here, like these 3 documents that we are producing in this room, they are not Rwandan documents, they are global documents. They belong to the world. And frequently, people look to the UN for policy documents, for research, to develop curriculums, all kinds of things. And we have a website that we are told is one of the most visited. People keep checking the website to see for information. So in terms of getting it to the ground, there is quite a bit with the UN and its presence all over the world that it's able to do. Thank you.
Going straight, my question goes to the to the UN Special Advisor, especially for the prevention of genocide. We have seen substantial efforts in the fight against genocide and denial and trivialization, especially for the genocide against the Tutsi. And I think this week-long event is part of a series of events and initiatives that aligns with this good cause. However, we still see some individuals across the world undermining and denying genocide against the Tutsi. As the UN Special Advisor, what do you think is the best approach the international community should adopt to address this? Again, lastly, what is your message to countries that still relent to bring to book genocide fugitives still roaming freely? Thank you.
Specific, I would say really specific legislation around the Holocaust denial, genocide denial. And I know we need to work very carefully in terms of freedom of expression and that thin line that exists between freedom of expression and what these deniers are doing. But at the same time, I do think that we would need, I think it's so important that we have like a global campaign against genocide denial, because the genocide denial doesn't happen only to Rwanda. In Srebrenica, it's actually very, very rampant. It is, for us to even get a genocide denial law to be put in place, for us to support that and for it to happen, it was a very, very difficult time for the country. And the hate speech, by the time this law was being passed, you couldn't open a newspaper and not find anything on genocide denial. It was prevalent, it was everywhere. And we actually had instances of where even the mayor of Srebrenica, where the genocide happened, denied. But as soon as this law was passed, we saw the spike going down on hate speech, because people take seriously. People understand that the law, the rule of law is important. But over and above that, we need to really invest in young people, young generations, make them understand what genocide is, make them understand that genocide is not things that happened in history or things that only happen to some communities, that it can happen to anyone around the world. We need to build very strong consciousness in people around the world. We need to make it mandatory learning around the world. The stages, Professor Stanton's stages of prevention of genocide, but also what is it that young people need to do to stop this from happening. So ultimately, at the end of the day, for those people who are living free in those countries that they're living in, the international rescue mechanism, the prosecutor, he was here yesterday. It's unfortunate he's not here today because he continues to actively pursue those people. He has, like, for example, the case of Fulgence Kaishema, they were able to work with South Africa to get him charged. So there's so much that's going on behind the scenes in terms of trying to get these people tried. But there are some countries where there is no movement at all, where there is no movement towards getting these people charged. And so for people like us in the kind of position that I'm holding, with the voice that when you speak that people listen, then we cannot keep quiet. We have to keep saying that if you are a country that is holding a person indicted by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, that person has been indicted for genocide, that person should be held to trial. Yes, that person must be held to trial. You cannot protect people who are indicted by an international criminal tribunal and at the same time say that you are upholding the rule of law in your country. If somebody steals even a bicycle or a chicken, they are held to account. Why would anyone protect anybody who is suspected of having been part of a genocide, of having killed all these people, millions or thousands of people? So it really defeats the mind in terms of why people would protect these people, but it also speaks to why genocide is called the crime of crimes. Why its impact is so huge. It's not the killing, it's beyond the killing. It's the complete, because the intent is to completely destroy an ethnic group that was intended for the Tutsi here. And so it continues long after the genocide. You see all these kind of impacts happening that include, for example, these people who are being protected by all these countries out there.